My name is Ozdoruk, VP of Marketing at Netomi. Netomi is a customer experience platform. We do AI for customer support teams, and we have been in business for around 6-7 years. I'm in charge of marketing here more than 4+ years. And before that, I was running marketing departments in other organizations as well. Other than Netomi, I'm also very well versed with early stage startups. I'm working with multiple early stage startups in different capacity. And today I'm very thrilled to be talking to you about positioning and messaging.
I am as well. So let's kick it off. I want to start out with, we chatted a little bit before we hit record about kind of some of the things that we could dive into today. And I want to just kind of kick it off with, your whole process and how you approach positioning in general. We can kind of start with that foundation if you'd like.
Yeah, definitely. So I have seen throughout my career, because my current company is my fourth startup and I work with lots of early stage startups. And I always start by studying the product first. Because I have engineering background, I was a software engineer for 4 years. I studied the product in detail as if I'm going to implement that, right? So I understand every detail of the product. That's my skill set that I brought my technical knowledge that to marketing. And once I'm 100% comfortable with the product, and then I set the market, understand what are the market needs, what are the market trends, what are the big players in the market, what are the trends and changing dimensions in the market, and then I try to understand the fit, product market fit, right? And try to understand what is our go-to-market channels and everything else. And then we have we need to do lots of things to scale the companies, but before creating any demand generation program, before creating any growth programs, it all starts with positioning and branding, right? So assuming the branding is good, I don't need to do any branding work, I start with the positioning, right? I understand the positioning, and for positioning, I have a simple framework, right? Basically, first, I do positioning for maximum 12 months because things change a lot in 12 months. I sometimes done positioning in 6 months or so, but sometimes it can go more than 12 months, but 12 months is my initial rule of thumb. And then after timeline is set, I look at the target audience. Because I studied the market, I know who is my target audience. Is that marketing leaders? Is that support leaders? Is that HR leaders? Is there any geographical changes? Is that any company size? I understand the target audience, which we also call ICP, ideal customer profile. And then I look at what problems do we solve? Like, what is the product that we offer to solve the pain points of these ICP? That's my third in the line. And then I look at the alternatives. If the market is not able to use my product, what is the alternative? Are there big competitors? Are there substitutes? Are there internal products? I list all these things to understand how I can fit into that space. And then I talk about, why does it matter? Like, why does it matter? Is that fastest time to market? Is that quickest implementation? Is that cheapest solution? Why does it matter for the end product? And finally, I try to get some proof points. My product will fit in this market because of this and that reason, because here is the proof. This is a custom testimonial, or here is like benchmark report, or here is a white paper. Whatever the proof point I have collect, I use it, and I come up with initial positioning statement. And then that positioning statement is, even though I might come up with, I have to be testing with lots of other teams. I test internally, I test with customers, I test with partners, I test sometimes with investors, and I continuously iterate with, most importantly, with prospects, because prospect is the most important thing we use this positioning for. So it's I don't marry any positioning statement, and in my cases, this is my fourth startup. Most of the time, I have changed it every 6 months or so. Like, whatever the positioning is, I drive the messaging, and then I continuously change it throughout my experience. And that has been my experience and that process so far when I create that positioning and messaging in startups.
Now, I like how you kind of laid that out in steps, because, before, you mentioned messaging, before somebody jumps into what you're going to say on the website or what you're going to say in your sales materials, like, you have to understand the positioning is that foundation, right? And
Yes.
yeah, I wanted to take a step back too. And you had mentioned in our earlier conversation about, some of the changes that you've seen or the types of positioning that you've seen in B2B. So like there's different approaches in B2B, correct?
Yeah. And by the way, I want to add one more comment. This indeed, I forgot to mention, positioning is the foundation of everything you do. Like sometimes we are, as marketers, are taught about it. Hey, you have to do website, you have to do social media, you have to do field show, everything. But you should not do anything before you fix your positioning, because positioning is the ultimate thing that drives all of your activities. So you are very right. Foundation, the positioning is foundation, so it drives all of your activities afterwards. In terms of different types of B2B positioning, based on my experience in various on different startups, I have done different types of positioning, and it's mostly about how mature is the market. For example, in my current company, Netomi, we are one of the 80 other customer support automation platform. So our positioning is based on differentiation, because people are already educated in this market. So we are sharing with them what is Netomi different than everybody else. On the other end of the scala, when there are only a couple of adapters in the market, other competitors in the market, or when you are the only one in the market, then your job is much different, because then the market is not educated enough for that one. You can think about Salesforce in 2000, for example, when they are the first one in CRM, but there was Siebel and others, but Salesforce for the first one who were doing cloud services. So Salesforce was indeed the pioneer in that space in 2000. Now it's a different story. Similarly, when I joined NVIDIA, I believe NVIDIA, your listeners are very familiar with. When I joined NVIDIA in 2012, NVIDIA was only selling to gamers. They were creating GPUs for gamers. And our business unit, then called Tesla business unit, were using GPUs to sell into general purpose GPUs, high performance computing groups. So which means that there was nobody else. We have to educate everybody from scratch. So in that case, our positioning stands out, not differentiated, but it's all about change-based positioning. So everything I did at NVIDIA was all about change-based positioning, because at that time there was no direct competitor to my product, and everybody was using CPUs to do high performance computing. And my peers' role was to change that behavior. Our positioning was you cannot only use CPU, you have to use CPU and you have to add a GPU to accelerate your computing. So that was all about change-based positioning, all about education, all about teaching them there's a new, better way in town rather than existing CPU-based solution. And then I just want to highlight these two things, because there is not one framework that works all of them, and there are different dimensions of how you can do change-based positioning, and there are different dimensions how you do differentiator-based positioning. For example, at differentiator-based positioning at Netomi, we have multiple spreadsheets that we track all of our competitors. For the top 10 competitors, we have a weekly spreadsheet we update based on our learning, continuous learning. And we do some traditional competitive analysis where we understand, when we check out their website, peer-to-peer site, like other website, but also we do some additional activities so that we can stand out. For example, one thing we were successfully implemented at Netomi was we were able to do secret shopping, where we were able to try to listen to our competitors' product, see like what they talk about, how they pitch themselves, and how they talk about Netomi, so we can understand how they are indeed in the market. And for the other 80 or 90 competitors who are tier 2 competitors, we like update that monthly so that we are always on top of all of our competitors. And there are different things to do on change-based positioning, and you have to create like pioneers and like lots of educational materials. But I just want to set these two things. I can talk about mostly my current experience in Netomi, because NVIDIA was, I think, 10 years ago. So I'm more than happy to talk about what we have done last couple of years at Netomi. And there were lots of challenges, and so far we were able to overcome all these challenges.
Yeah, no, for sure. And before we dive into those challenges and specifically, I do want to ask a couple quick questions. One is, when you say change-based positioning, is that related in any way specifically to what we call category design? Are they the same thing? Is it a different way to say category design, or are there some differences between those?
Yeah, I think that's 100% category. I think we also call category creation. That's something that's called. So sometimes people are scared to call that category creation because it's hard for like bigger players to adapt you, for example, like analysts and everybody else. But I think it is the case. Like I think if you are really a pioneer in the specific industry, and if you really want to put your stick in the ground, I think you have to create that category. So I use change-based positioning that I didn't talk into like details, but category creation is one of the part of that position. Yes, you have to create that category, and you have to say that, hey, dear prospect, I'm not in that bucket. It's a new bucket, right? So that is what we did that at NVIDIA in like 10 years ago, and this is how Salesforce did in early 2000. If you think about 2000, early 2000, there was like traditional in-house solutions like Siebel and others, maybe Oracle, but Salesforce say that we are the only CRM and we don't need a software. Actually, their logo was software and there was a cross on top of that because we are cloud-based software. So they tried to create a category based on for the first ever cloud-based software. If you remember, Salesforce created that category. So similarly, Amazon created the category earlier than Salesforce, and so on and so forth. So yes, you are totally right. Category creation is a mandatory part of that change-based positioning.
Thank you for, I just want to make sure also for myself that I'm not, ignoring if there's a similarity, because the vocabulary, again, we talked earlier about like everybody kind of has their own perspective on many of these things. So not only for myself, for people listening. So if they're listening to this and thinking like, wait a minute, where is this category design? Then they know like that, whether they call it category design or change-based positioning, that relates to that binary that you were talking about with differentiating. And then second question, before we dive into the specific challenges that you faced, when you mentioned adapting based, or when you mentioned like doing the differentiation approach, and you're looking every week at your competitors, right? When you're looking at if there's similarities, let's say your main goal, as you said, is to have that differentiation as the foundation of your positioning. If one of your competitors starts to let's say they adopt similar messaging, or they launch a new product that you feel is very similar to what you're already doing, to what degree do you kind of flex to what the competitors are doing versus like, well, we're still going to do what we do best, even if there's a couple of other competitors that are doing something similar? Or is it more like, hey, they've now moved into the space, we need to now pivot a little bit away from that?
Yeah, so I think you have to pick your battles. Excellent question. So you have to pick your battles. In some cases at Netomi, we dive down on a couple of areas where we are confident on that. And some of the areas we moved on, we focus on other areas. For example, the things that we focus on is that we fought back with them, right? For example, first thing I have done at Netomi was I see that when I noticed that there are so many Me Too products, I work with my engineering peer, like VP of engineering, and two of us, we wrote a white paper. And that white paper, we compared our product with everybody else in certain features because we believe that we have the best product. So we want to show technically and statistically significant way to show that our product Netomi is better than everybody else. So what we did was we look at all the big companies and we downloaded them, and then we have a sample of 15 or so data set, and we compare Netomi with everybody else, and we shared that because we believed our NLP stands for natural language processing, is better than everybody else. So we prove that we are indeed better than them based on the certain dimension. I can send you guys that white paper, and that white paper through us in that market. But in some other areas, we have to move on. Some things like if there are so many volume, and as a startup, you don't have so much resources, even like creating white paper is a resource, right? Because my engineering leader sacrificed some of the product development to help me with that white paper production. So there is some sacrifice happening there. And you have to also think about that if the market is very large, there'll be some consolidation. And consolidation will happen only, you have to focus only like top 2-3 companies will move on. For example, let me give you another example from NVIDIA from early 90s. In 90s, there were, when NVIDIA was not in a hype HPC group, when they were doing only gamers, there were 40 or 45 different game processor, like chip processors, like for gaming only, graphic processors. But fast forward like 20 years, there's only 2 or 3 left because consolidation happened. And the way NVIDIA moved through these competitors, that continuous innovation. That's what we do at NVIDIA, Netomi as well. We innovate on the areas where we are very good at, so that nobody can say we have the same product. For example, one more example to answer your question. For example, we call ourselves, before even Gen AI came to picture and everybody else, we were calling ourselves conversational AI platform. And we noticed that lots of people say, hey, we also have AI platform. But when we look at their products, it is a traditional chatbot, and these are rule-based chatbot. It has nothing to do with AI. Basically, rule-based chatbot means that if this question comes, answer this way. If this question comes, answer that way. If this question, all like decision tree way. There is nothing to do with AI. And we prove that to our prospect. It is not, this is good rule-based product, but it is not AI. It doesn't understand what you say. It has to be a certain way. So we keep educating them as well. But overcome my to reiterate my answer, you have to pick your battles because you have limited resource. Pick the battles where you are very good at and double down on these areas so you can win in these dimensions.
And I love how you said that, the doubling down on what you're very good at, because I think that's such an important part of this mix. And that's kind of why I asked that question about to what degree is the competition setting the bar, setting the agenda, right? Setting the game rules. And a lot of times what I've seen with companies is, they'll chase, right? They'll chase, like one competitor, a random competitor will like add a new product, and then they'll change their whole approach because now they want to chase that, or they want to make it theirs a little better than that, instead of looking at it and saying, wait a minute, is that based on our strengths, right? I'm a big believer in not only leveraging our own strengths as people, right? But companies are the same way, right? If you think about like the Marcus Buckingham approach to strengths, companies have their own strengths. And they're going to
sometimes
usually
people go after sorry, I just want, as a very important, sometimes people go after shiny objects. Like after generative AI became a big thing, every company in the world has a generative AI component, magically, right? Like they were not mentioning anything AI, now everybody's generative AI. So if it is not your strength, I think you will only lose in the long term, right? It's good to be like part of that media coverage. Oh, okay, my database solution is also generative AI, but if it is not your strength, focus on your database, not your generative AI, because you don't need to be generative AI to do your database. So sometimes people chase shiny objects, and unless it is your indeed strength, it will make you fail in the long term.
I think that's really good advice, and I'm glad that you mentioned that, because I know there's lots of different perspectives on how to approach competitive analysis and differentiation, and I think it's just a really good important point to bring up to listeners and people that are thinking about, like, differentiation does not necessarily mean that you're allowing your competitors to define the game, right?
Yeah.
Let's back up too, and we wanted to talk a little bit about you had some experiences of challenges, right, with positioning and messaging that you've dealt with, and I want to give you a chance to kind of share a little bit about that.
Sure. I mean, we have actually more than one challenges. So biggest challenge was, as I mentioned earlier, was very crowded space. So to overcome that one, we did the things that I mentioned, like the detailed competitive analysis, secret shopping, white paper, benchmarking reports, and continuous AE training. But there was other challenges as well, right? One other challenge was brand recognition, right? Again, we are in a space where there are lots of big brands, and our company is like unknown to most people. So brand recognition was a big challenge. So to overcome that one, we come up with unique pioneering ideas. For example, we come up with what we called SPI. SPI stands for Support Performance Index, and we just made up, myself and my team member, we just made up SPI. And what we do is that every month we pick one industry, because again, we are in support, we serve support leaders. We pick one industry and we look at top 100 companies in that industry, let's say airlines or telecommunications, and we compare all these companies based on their support competitiveness. Because we can call their support line, we can email their support line, we can use social media to reach out to them, we can do other channels, and we were able to create monthly reports to come up to compare the leaders from the laggards. And these really resonate very well with our prospects, because when we rank these 100 by multiple dimensions, we reach out to these guys and say, hey, you are ranked number 63 and you want to go at the top, we can tell you more. That was really helpful for us. So it really moved. And also from awareness perspective, lots of media articles like Forbes and other picked up our reports, and they mentioned that as well. Also, brand recognition, we also work with lots of influencers. Like, for example, in our support space, we identified the big influencers. Like, one was, for example, Shep Hyken, and we became friends with him, and he continues to write about us, and that really improved our brand recognition. And also, we built like thought leadership pieces. Like, continuously, we have monthly webinars. We doubled down on social media. We did some PR activities, and we go to events. And when we go to events, we don't just go to events just to be there. For example, we sponsored a keynote event in October of last year. It's called CCW. Instead of like speaking there, we have we prepared it so that people will remember us. I put two of my customers on stage, and my CEO, who will be the third speaker, didn't walk to the stage. He ride on an electric bike, which is also my customer, on that bike, and drive all the way to that small audience, and then park his bike and then walk to that stage. And then that was talk of the rest of the 3 days. We also use that bike in our booth to leverage it. So we try to use all the cheap ways to get our brand up to market. Like, whatever we did in bike, it was captured by the organizers of the show, and we were like to talk a lot in that show. And other than the event, everything I mentioned earlier, that the SPI index or like a thought leadership, is free. So I'm very cost conscious. I'm very cost conscious on ROI. With the exception of this event sponsorship, everything we do is free. I find ways to you can call guerrilla marketing, but find ways to create noise without creating so much expense to my financial department. And so far we have been successful. We make up unique names like SPI and everything, and we really generate results. This was one challenge. Another challenge, Marcus, was perception of due to earlier chatbots. I'm sure you use chatbots in the past, and you try to talk to chatbot, and then I'm sure you yelled at chatbot at one point, that because you talk to the chatbot and then chatbot says, I don't understand, can you tell again, even though you tell in like 3 different words. This is something we know that was the case. So to overcome that challenge, what we did was we made up again a generation of chatbots. We created like chart, and we put all these first generation chatbots. We call them first generation chatbots on the part of the lower part of the x-axis, and we call ourselves at the end of that x-axis. We call that this is where we are. So this is much, and when we explain that this is the chatbots you experienced was in 2015, now it is much different challenge. So it is, we were able to convince the customers. Another way to get rid of the early generation of chatbots conception is that dealing with partners. Like since day one, I myself and my team members, we deal with our large players in the market, like Salesforce, like Zendesk. And because we became partners with them, and they see the value that Netomi bring to the table, they write about us. They put some webinars about it. They write continuous blog posts about it. And Zendesk, actually, one of my proud moments is that Zendesk write a blog post, and they talk about biggest chatbots in the market, and they put Netomi right after Zendesk on chatbot among a list of 50 chatbots. So this is, and there are many other things that this partnership brought in the table. Again, none of we pay money. All of these stuff I mentioned was without spending any dime. And just to complete the like picture of the positioning, another big challenge was limited large customers, because we started the journey with mid-market, and so we didn't have so many big customers like American Airlines or Macy's. Like, we don't have these kind of things. So that's why we doubled down on 2 things. One was analyst relationships, and then the other one was peer-to-peer sites. So analyst relationship, we got very good results from Gartner. Gartner told us we are a cool vendor. Forrester continues to push report for us. The last report Forrester published about Netomi was a month ago, and they put in the center of their chatbot decision criteria, they put our own framework. And from peer-to-peer sites, again, it is not easy, but you have to convince your customers to write. But then we told our customers to go, we incentivize, and people will not write until you push them. At the end of the day, our ratings go all the way from 4.1 to 4.8, because 4.8, and people have lots of good things to talk about us. 4.8 is not a bad number. Actually, I prefer 4.8 or 4.9 better than 5.0, because it is much more credible. And other than 4.8, we also got 2 leadership badge from G2. And these really, these Gartner logos, Forrester logos, and G2 logos and others really help compensate our limited large customers. And these are, I think, one of the biggest challenges we have overcome at Netomi.
A couple of really important points that you brought up in this that I want to just route back to is, one, I like how you mentioned about focusing on creativity versus just spending money, right? Because I think a lot of times, especially when you're talking about conferences, where a lot of them are pay to play, and you could just throw money endlessly at opportunities. There's more than there will always be more opportunities for you to spend on advertising or whatever it is, right? And a lot of things that used to be organic, like conferences, are now not. They're paid. You have to pay to even be part of like a panel. So that's a really good important point for people that are listening, especially like people that are founders. Like, in addition to marketing professionals, people that are founders or business owners listening, to think about, like, you're not just limited by your budget. Your budget is part of it, but it's also your ability to be creative. And then the second part that you just mentioned with G2 and Forrester, and it's not necessarily applicable to every industry, but specifically software, especially when there's so many players in the space that the audience or your prospects might not be able to immediately tell the difference between. They can easily tell the difference between whether a company has a lot of good reviews and whether they don't. Kind of like when you shop on Amazon. I buy a lot of books on Amazon, and I do look at the reviews, right? So thinking about in that terms for people who are listening, if you're in that space, and let's say you're not a marketing professional, but you're a founder or something, like, how can you start to get that crowd sourcing, that crowd response, the social proof in there, because it makes a lot of difference for people. And kind of that's going to lead us in that as we wrap up right now. I want to give you a chance, like, what suggestions would you share for not only marketing people, but also, like I said, founders and business owners that are like looking to reposition themselves and upgrade their marketing and their messaging approach? Any kind of parting words of advice you can share?
Yeah, definitely. One small note on that Amazon thing. I think I just want to say that today's buyers are extremely educational. Like you are not, you're always looking at the reviews before buying. Same thing for software, right? There are so many Me Too products. Like, if somebody is 4.8 versus 3.8, then if you are 3.8, you have a very limited chance. Like, you have to fix your review. And because that is the table stakes at this point. If you really want to grow, you have to fix that point. That's my first suggestion. If you have, because there are so many because people have access to the same resources. Like, I can hire the same engineers that your company hires. I can build the same marketing automation tools that your company can do. But one thing is that, what is the output? So if you fix your output, if you fix your digital footprint, not only in your website, but in external website, I think that's the starting point. But in terms of, to answer your question, what would my suggestion is that I think you should always start understanding the product and market. Like, as I mentioned earlier, chasing after shiny objects is not important. I'm a big fan of Jeffrey Moore's Crossing the Chasm book, and I always tell that in my team. So we have to always prioritize. Sometimes CEOs want to chase all the 10 pins, but realistically, if you're a startup, you cannot chase all the 10 pins. You have to pick one pin. Sometimes you have to sacrifice all the other 9 pins, but focus on your energy and resource on that one pin. That is one thing. And then to do that, you have to pinpoint very well your positioning and messaging. What is in it that these guys in that pin buy from me? What is the offer I have based on the framework I mentioned? Like, why I should be a solution to their pain point. As long as you focus and lock down on that first pin and create a positioning and messaging based on that pin, I think the next will come, the other pins will come eventually. That's something I want to remind everybody, that prioritization is very important. And then regarding positioning, I think it is not a one-time thing that you put on this statically, right? Like how I change my website every couple of months. Positioning should be also changed very frequently because things change a lot. Like we have to all see the impact of OpenAI's ChatGPT and things have changed, but it doesn't have to be ChatGPT. You have to always listen to your customers, listen to your partners, listen to bigger players in the industry, and then change it. That might ask your question: does my positioning still like resonate with people? Is it still valid? And if the answer is not 100%, then you have to go back to the drawing board and you have to create that based on the framework I mentioned. You have to recreate your positioning, and then you keep iterating as needed. Because as I mentioned earlier, positioning is the ultimate like foundation part that drives all of your marketing and sales activities. If you don't do the positioning properly, then all the other things might fail in the future. So I really recommend that you pay enough attention to doing a proper positioning and messaging before doing anything else.